Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Peak Human Podcast. We missed a week there, but don't worry, we're back. We got some more great episodes. Today I have a great one with Dr. Tyna Moore. She's very cool. Before we get into that, I'll tell you one more time, go back to episode 1, listen to all the great episodes, give this podcast a review on iTunes or the podcast app, and please share with friends and family. It really helps spread the good word. So, Dr. Tyna, she is a fellow freedom fighter. She's amazing. I met her online like everyone else these days. Who meets in real life? Oh, only in Austin. I only meet great people here in Austin who are in the ancestral health world. Well, Dr. Tyna is semi-trapped in Portland. She's amazing, though. She's fighting the good fight. She tells her story of her own viral history. She had some viral problems for her whole life, really, or stretching back to her earlier years. She is a naturopathic doctor. She helps people heal their pain. In this episode, we get into a lot of topics about taking health into your own hands, about what you can do against any type of virus, about metabolic health, about how actually people with poor metabolic health have worse outcomes and actually can spread more virus. We talk about what her thoughts on how we could have done things differently over the past 2 years. We talk about muscle mass. We talk about eating healthy animal foods and being strong into your old age and a lot of other stuff. I really think you're going to love this one. Here's her official bio. A naturopathic doctor and chiropractor, Dr. Tyna Moore has over 3 decades of experience in the medical world as a leading expert in holistic regenerative medicine, resilient health, and medical autonomy. Dr. Tyna brings an honest and metabolically focused approach towards treating all varieties of musculoskeletal conditions, spreading her wisdom and knowledge as a #1 best-selling author, international speaker, and host of the Dr. Tyna Show podcast. She's great. We're going to have her here in Austin at some point, speaking at another freedom rally. But now I have to talk about Nose to Tail because I have no sponsors. I just have my own company with my own ranchers, my good pals in Texas, doing the regenerative agriculture, getting the meat out to you straight to your door. We have beef, bison, lamb, chicken, pork, all the best stuff, all holistically managed, regeneratively raised. The chicken and pigs are fed a special low PUFA diet, no seed oils, low PUFA, low omega-6, linoleic acid. We have all the beef, bison, and lamb on open pasture eating a wild-fed diet, wild-crafted, we call it. They're eating all kinds of things, hundreds and hundreds of species of different forage, getting them a super diverse range of nutrients, regenerating the land, doing all the good things. So get it sent to you. Our primal beef is temporarily out, our #1 product. So sad. Hopefully we'll have it by next week. It's in such high demand. It has the organs mixed in. That's liver, heart, kidney, and spleen. We even have spleen. Not everyone does this. So get all those nutrients packed into your ground beef. We also have our biltong. Again, our most popular item, the livervores, is sold out. We're making more now. It is a stick of air-dried beef, all grass-fed, all natural, no funny stuff in it. And it has 30% liver. That's going to come back very soon. So you can check out the other biltong products, the other Drovors products, which is basically just a stick of biltong. We have the body care products. We have our new skin food coming in very soon. We're making a temporary batch because the big batch is taking so long. We have the lip balms in. We have the soap in stock. We're so close to getting in the rest of the stuff. I'm so sorry. Each week I say we're going to have it updated and we don't. Another thing we talk about in the podcast is the Austin Compound, the Sapien Health and Wellness Center. I mentioned we're about to sign the lease like a day from now. It could be signed. I was just there today with some contractors. I go there every day now. We just got to get this lease signed and we're going to get up and running. I'd say July 7th, open date. I'm speaking at KetoCon. We're doing a Nose to Tail booth at KetoCon. That's July 8th. We're going to have a launch party July 7th, hopefully. Maybe I shouldn't be announcing this, but if you're in Austin, July 7th, or if you're coming to KetoCon, come say hi. We're going to do a preview of the Food Lies film. Food Lies is going well. We're going to cut together a preview, a little bit of a trailer, a sneak peek, only shown at KetoCon. So definitely make it for that. Quick update on that. We're grinding, man. We're grinding daily on this Food Lies project, 6-part series now. We're really trying to finish it by the end of the year. I really think we can do it. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be worth all this wait. Trust me. High quality stuff. We're trying to get on Netflix. We can't mess around. We can't just throw something out there or it's not going to make it on Netflix. So get your meat at nosetotail.org. Maybe I should have mentioned the website earlier. That's all at nosetotail.org. Body care, seasonings, meat, biltong, get it all, nosetotail.org. And let's get on to the show with Dr. Tyna. Hello, Dr. Tyna. How are you doing?
I'm great. Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely. We're finally doing it. we started communicating because of the immune system awareness rally that I had last summer here in Austin, and I was going to have another one because it was such a great success, and you were going to come speak at it, and that would have been awesome, but it never happened.
Oh, I was wondering if it ever did, and I figured you'd let me know. But if you do have one in the future, then I'm in.
Well, I'm about to sign a lease maybe tomorrow on a place here in Austin. I keep talking about our compound. It's our ancestral health facility, mainly around events. I think I really, once I had that big event, I called it the Freedom Rally. Actually, we called it the Immune System Awareness Rally as like a code, but people knew what it was. You know, it was JP Sears, it was Zuby. We had Dr. Kirk Parsley, who was amazing, and some other people, and we basically just talked about freedom and taking health into your own hands. And we're going to be doing other stuff like that at this event center. That
I love it.
yeah. So
I'm
yes,
in.
you'll be there.
Hit me up when you figure it out. That's exciting.
Oh yeah, you'll be there. So let's introduce the audience to you a bit more. Can you give us an
Sure.
overview, please?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Tyna Moore. I'm a naturopathic physician and I'm a chiropractor. I have been in practice for, oh gosh, I was in practice for a good 10 plus years, and I have been in medicine coming up on 30 years now. My time in the trenches working in hospitals and for other doctors as well. I closed my practice right before the pandemic hit. I oddly knew something was coming, and I did not want my voice to be I knew my voice was going to be needed. I don't know how else to put it. And I didn't
Mm.
want my income to be contingent on my practice. So I shifted gears. I had already had an online business going. I actually coach health practitioners in marketing and online business as an aside. And so I just kind of went full bore with that. And then the pandemic hit, and I jumped in with both feet. I do believe in viruses, and I do believe that a virus was going around and causing a lot of destruction. However, I think that the information we were given early on and throughout and continue to get is very skewed and mostly incorrect. And I think that the way this has been handled by the public health authorities is atrocious. You know,
Oh,
the root of all of the ability to withstand this virus. Well, let's just put it this way. Humans are a very sickly bunch at this point, and I don't think this virus is nearly as gnarly. Well, it certainly isn't now that it's morphed into this kinder, gentler version. But originally speaking, I realized that, you know, some folks were up against it, but those folks all had a lot of things in common, and we knew what those commonalities were. And nobody was talking about that to try to help these folks. And it just happens that the most susceptible to the virus happened to be the majority of the human population at this point. And so that was the pickle. And that's how you and I met, I think, through Instagram during all of this. And yeah, and here we are, where
well,
I think the
yeah.
pandemic's over, you know?
I mean, yeah, I guess we could call it over. I mean, I've been in Texas. It hasn't been uh, much of a thing this whole time anyway. It was open the entire time that I was here, at least, you know. So I always just think that's interesting that people don't know that Texas and Florida, like life was going on as normal, and people were packed in closed places the entire time. You know, there was no rules. There was absolutely jam packed closed rooms with no masks the entire time, no vax mandates, and we did better than most other states. I looked up the data. We did better than most states. We did well. And yes, you've been speaking out this entire time, and that's how I found you on Instagram. So I'm glad that you're speaking out. And you also talked about, you know, a history of viruses, or, you know, you do focus on viruses and have your own story of having a virus and having sort of a long battle with that. So maybe you could start back there, and then we'll get into the other stuff later. I like to save the good stuff for the end.
All right. Well, just to back up, so you've been in Texas where they're not playing pandemic, and I've been in Oregon the whole time, living under tyranny. And it's been awesome to see so many people come forward on social media and really fight for medical freedom. But I have to say that the bulk of those people were living in free states. They were not living under the thumb of tyranny. And until one has and lived with predominantly, the predominant population here is severely brainwashed. And until one has, it's really hard to understand. It's very odd to walk around watching to this day, mask mandates have been lifted. And I saw a photo of some folks at the Hamilton, the play Hamilton, the musical. It was showing here in Portland, downtown Portland. And to see people posting pictures of themselves in masks at a Hamilton, it's like the irony was not lost on me. A
Wow.
play all about freedom. And here
Yeah.
is everybody wearing masks after the mandate's been lifted for a virus that at this point is morphed into something very mild. It's super weird. So they've been playing full out pandemic here, and I've been just trying to hold the line, it's crazy making. Okay, so my story, so I got hit when I was 19 by cytomegalovirus, which is pretty benign and most people get and just zoom right through it. It's no big deal. And for some reason, it took me out. And I think it's because at the time I was really underweight. It was like the heroin chic 90s. So while I was not doing heroin, of course, I was super underweight and mildly anorexic and chain smoking and not sleeping and drinking too much. Probably I was in college, not eating well at all. I was like a mac and cheesetarian, and it caught up to me. And I guess I was severely immunocompromised because it hit me really hard. And that turned into a whole long haul for me. And I was seeking answers continuously, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I mean, it threw me for a loop, and that virus attacks the brain. So it really sent me into a downward spiral. And I was misdiagnosed along the way. I was thrown into autoimmune disease from it. Turning the corner on my early 20s, I got out of undergrad and I met my mentor, who was Dr. Rick Marinelli, who was a naturopathic physician and an acupuncturist. And he was the first person to say, like, hey, you're not crazy. This virus is attacking your brain. And it's because your immune system is jacked, and that's lifestyle. Like, you need to severely change your lifestyle. And so he helped me quit smoking through acupuncture, changed my diet, changed my ways. Not much though. And several years later down the line, I found myself in medical school. I was actually doing 2 programs concurrently, which was insane. Looking back, I regret that decision. It's not a good idea for my health. But I got hit with influenza while I was in Mexico and got hit hard, and it turned into meningitis. And so all of the gains I had made coming out of that cytomegalovirus sort of just like I got dropped back into hell again. And I lost a ton of weight, and I barely made it out of school in one piece. I mean, I was really trying to dig myself out of a hole there. I remember just getting up every morning and thinking, like, literally having to crawl into the sitting position and then crawl up the wall to get standing, and remembering, like, or thinking like, this is what dying feels like. This is terrible. And so I have been on this quest ever since to build back this body. And while it's got some, there's some chinks in the armor, I feel I've done a decently good job. And that was through 100%, just personal responsibility, like massive personal responsibility, and taking matters into my own hands. And through everything I've learned. So my journey of medicine has been one of self-healing, but also just trying to find answers. So when this pandemic hit, I thought for sure, like, hey, we naturopathic doctors are really good at handling chronic viral infections. We're really good at handling acute viral infections. We're not treating viruses. We're treating the person. If you make the person resilient, they don't get sick from the virus or as sick, right? It just kind of burns through them. It's not a big deal. And so I thought for sure that message would come out. I thought my profession would step up and save the day. Instead, they turned and attacked me viciously. And it's been a wild, wild ride. Like, I will not lie. I have some pretty decent PTSD at this point from all of it, because I just can't believe that basic sciences and just basic clinical common sense has been completely disregarded and thrown out the window to the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives, in my opinion.
This is super important. Even the alternative medicine, I don't know a better term than that, right? We're sort of the alternative medicine because we're certainly not in the sick care system. And even those people kind of got brainwashed and kind of turned against you, it sounds.
Yeah, it was just super weird. And honestly, I wasn't surprised in most cases. I mean, most of the people I know that are fairly spineless are the ones who turned against me, the ones who like to follow the crowd anyway. I already knew that about them. But yeah, I think that people have different risk tolerances and different sets of fear. And there clearly is a massive fear around an invisible little tiny particle that can get in your body and wreak havoc. But this virus wreaks havoc on those who are metabolically unsound. We just happen to have, close to 90% of our adult population is metabolically unsound. So I'm not, you're not. I don't know a single person who's metabolically healthy who was afraid. For most of the people I know who strength train, eat well, live by the natural laws of nature, we were like, okay, let's go. Everybody got through it. Just some people got hit harder than others, but we all got through it, and it's very clear who was most at risk. We could have done something to help those people early on if the helpers hadn't been silenced. There was a very clear assignment from somewhere to shut us up. And those of us who were trying to help were simply just trying to spread this message of metabolic health. Guys like Mike Mutzel, Sean Stevenson, we were all saying the same thing. Like, hey guys, you can reverse your autoimmune disease. You can reverse your metabolic. You can't completely reverse autoimmune disease, but you certainly can dial it down. All the things that were putting up people at risk were things that were lifestyle induced and modifiable. So that was
Obesity,
frustrating.
Yeah, metabolic health, obesity, autoimmune immune system. So even I found this video I posted about Fauci even before, it was May 2019. So it was a year before this happened. He was actually espousing the same things. He was talking about getting sleep, getting vitamin D, eating well, and exercising. He's like, these are the basic things you should be doing. You don't need to be scared of something. And so that went out the window. And so, you're go into a little more into that, because you're saying you knew this beforehand. So many people knew how to treat a virus or how to stay safe or how to be healthy beforehand. And then that was all thrown out the window.
Right. Well, so in naturopathic medicine, we don't treat diseases, we treat people, right? So I'm trying to figure out where homeostasis is off and how to make a human more resilient in general and how to keep their homeostasis on point so that they're happy and healthy and can handle infectious processes. I know diabetics are far more prone to infection. My entire practice was regenerative injection therapies for well over a decade. And I did not inject diabetics because they run the risk of you run the risk of seeding their joint with an infection far more than you would of a non-diabetic. And it's because we all have bacteria that live on our skin, Staph aureus, and their immune systems just can't handle it. If we get a little bit of that through the skin, no matter how well we clean the area and disinfect it, if we get a little of that through the skin and into the joint, in a healthy person, their immune system will just handle it. In a diabetic, it could turn into a joint infection, which is a big deal. It's an emergent situation. It's, you got to open the joint up, lavage it. It's a big deal. And so in my practice, I would not even treat somebody until we got their blood sugars managed, because they're so much more prone to infection. We knew that they were more prone to, and obese folks as well were more prone to all kinds of issues with influenza. This virus isn't that much different as far as its structure and how it works. I'm not saying they're the same thing by any means, but they are similarly, mechanistically similar, and they're spread by aerosols as well. And they like to infect the lungs. And so every fall, us naturopathic doctors get our patients ready. We get them loaded up on their D. Hopefully I was always telling patients to get as tan as possible during the summer so that they had their vitamin D stores in check for fall time and winter, making sure that they had adequate zinc because zinc inhibits viral replication, making sure they had adequate vitamin C so that that works in a myriad of ways on your immune system, as well as inhibiting viral replication and being anti-inflammatory. At its root, vitamin D, vitamin C, and vitamin C or zinc help collagen synthesis. And so I was always giving patients high doses of those going into fall and winter because I am a regenerative injection therapist, and that we are trying to induce collagen synthesis through these therapies, through these injections. Well, at its root, your tissue integrity is everything. And if your collagen is jacked, then the chances of a cytokine storm or an immune system gone rogue is going to be more detrimental because your collagen is kind of gooey, if you will. I mean, for lack of a better term. And so having good integrity in your collagen comes down to your nutritional status. Are you getting enough protein? Are you lifting weights? Are you doing the things to keep your collagen intact? And so that's kind of like the root cause thinking process in my head. And the fact that none of that was discussed when this started was beyond me. I thought for sure come summertime, they'd be like, hey, you guys, you should probably bone up on some basic nutrients for winter, but that was never discussed. And we know that fat cells wreak havoc in so many ways, which we can get into or save it for another day, but they really can induce a lot of havoc from an inflammatory standpoint. They are an endocrine organ as unto themselves, and they have more ACE2 receptors, so more places for the virus to glom onto. So that was another message I was trying to get at. Was like, hey, do everything you can to reduce your adipose cells. Like, bring your fat cell down in size, because if you do, you have less propensity to even rock the virus. Like, you're not going to have as many receptors, you're not going to have as much replication. And that message was attacked as well for being fatophobic. I mean, I couldn't get a message out that would satiate the mob. And it seemed like a very concerted, organized attack to silence those of us who were trying to spread that message, or people simply didn't want to hear it and take any personal responsibility. It's both.
Oh, I think it is very top down. It's very purposeful. People got blocked, banned, removed from social media for even suggesting this stuff. And and then people had to self-censor. And then, yes, there also is even like a third problem, which is, yes, people don't want to take responsibility. It seems like, there was like a big divide of people who wanted to take their health into their own hands, right? That's what I said before. That's our community. The people who have always done that weren't scared of this whole thing from day one, and managed fine, because they knew they were taking their health in their own hands. They actively were and continued to. And so it's all good. And then there's this other portion of the population that's pervading culture in general, is that they don't want to take responsibility, or it's like they just outsource everything. Let's outsource. Oh, I want my meals from the government. I want the free lunches from school. I want the free education, free this, free that. I'm not against, I'm not going to get political about that stuff at all. But it's just that notion of just outsource it, and then outsource your immunity. We're like, we insource our immunity. We work on it daily. Some people are just going to outsource immunity to a jab. They're like, oh, well, I'm safe because I outsourced my immunity to the government. It's like, what else are you going to outsource to? It's insane.
And that was another piece, is we had the data on prior attempts at vaccines for coronaviruses, and it didn't go well. And so my messaging early was like, hey, everybody, I don't care what they've told you. I knew something was off when they started talking about it being in droplets only. And I'm like, anybody that looks at a virology textbook from prior to 2020 knows it's coronaviruses are aerosolized. Big difference. Like, gets through the air ducts into adjacent buildings in the case of SARS-CoV-1. Like, we knew this. And so I knew there was some weird agenda happening when they were lying about the basics of how this worked. And then on top of it, the stay in your house and lock down and wait for us to save you messaging was just crazy to me, because as well as I do, your immune system needs practice. And without practice, the diversity of your microbiome everywhere decreases significantly, and you're a sitting duck. And so they literally induced immunocompromise in the entire human population by locking us up. They made us all severely more vulnerable. And then they threw in a leaky vaccine that we knew did not stop transmission. That was never mentioned in any of the original studies, which we're getting more and more information on every day. But I knew from the beginning, I was like, wait a minute, you guys, these numbers are not adding up. And I tried to talk about it. And of course, that was a firestorm. But I was like, these numbers are not adding up. This data isn't adding up. And I'm not a statistician. I don't know exactly how to, tell you why. It wasn't adding up. And I was asking everyone I knew who was smarter than me, and they're like, you're right, it's not adding up, but don't talk about it, because you don't need to be on the shit list of Pfizer. So I was like, I'm already on the shit list, guys. I might as well. Yeah. And so I've been sharing studies as they came out. And when we look at the populations around the world, specifically the islands of people who've been highly vaccinated, we were watching failure of the vaccine over and over and over. But that information was not getting out to the mainstream media. But we were seeing it. Those of us who were looking were seeing it, right? And so I'm like, you guys, this isn't working in Israel. They're up to their fourth booster. We hadn't even barely gotten to most people to 2 shots, and they were seeing extreme failure rates. And then if you look at the islands, I knew this zero COVID policy was never going to work. And you went out. Are you there still?
Sorry. Yeah, no, good.
That's okay. I knew the zero COVID policy wasn't going to work. And yet that's the strategy that islands like Australia and New Zealand were working. And now we're seeing the data, like things are not going well in South Korea. Things are not going well in Australia. And just yesterday, I saw the data on Canada. The death rates are predominantly in the vaccinated. I mean, period. It's just a matter of time until that starts occurring here. And what we're seeing, I think, in some of these island populations or these very highly blockaded and vaccinated populations where they locked everyone down hard, is we're starting to see some antibody dependent enhancement and some other concerning immunological issues that are, it's not good. This is not bode well for the vaccinated. So I'm really not afraid of this virus at this point. I was pretty stoked when Omicron came around. I was careful at first. I listened to what was coming out in the literature. And when I realized that it was a very benign, this is exactly what viruses are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to get kinder and gentler and chill out, which it did. And I was stoked. I was like, Mom, Dad, game on. Like, I hope you get it. Like, this is how you're going to inoculate yourself against future variants, which all viruses, I don't care what people say. I have read through the articles where scientists are like, sometimes viruses get worse. That's bullshit. Their argument is so poor on that front. Viruses do not get worse. Viruses might shift, but it's still only going to negatively impact those who are metabolically inflexible and most at risk. And so at the end of the day, the same message prevails. If you're healthy and fit, which we've had 2.5 years to do, I don't have a lot of sympathy left at this point. We've had 2.5 years to get our shit together as a species, and we have failed. And, folks like you and I have been trying to ring that bell and get that message out, and just getting hit with people wanting to argue about all the nuances. Yeah, there's a group of people who don't have access to all the things we have access to, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I have met many, many people through my work in community clinics and through outreach in different countries that are the poorest of poor. And when you educate them and you empower them with information, they do better. But we're treating everybody as if they're stupid. And the messaging from the far left has been and I used to be on the far left at the beginning of all this, the messaging has been very disempowering, in my opinion, of there's a small subset of people who are truly immunologically compromised, a very small subset, but that word has been appropriated by just about everyone who has eaten themselves into a chronic lifestyle disease. And they're like, well, I'm immunocompromised. I'm like, that's because you eat like shit and you never move. Like, how is that my problem? But somehow it's become my problem. That part gets me. Like, that's where I drew the line and I put my foot down, because I'm like, this is not my problem. I work every day to maintain my health as someone who was chronically ill. I know that. I know the whole, like, let me wear my diagnosis as my badge of honor messaging. I used to live it. I used to embody it. And as someone who's overcome that personally and helped countless other patients do the same, it's really infuriating when for the greater good suddenly turned into get an experimental jab versus why don't you get your shit together and let's everybody as a society get healthier so that we can be better citizens and take better care of one another.
It's huge missed opportunity. Yeah. I don't get it. It's been almost 2.5 years. Like, yes, this was a huge missed opportunity that everyone could have gotten healthier. We could have done so many other things and it would have been a better outcome. And I truly do think that, yeah, like the outcomes would have been better. There would have been less deaths. People, can argue like, oh, well, this was, you can't just let the disease run rapid and like just kill old people. I'm like, well, yeah, that I'm not saying we should do that either. Maybe you should say what would you have done? Knowing, because you already knew how this stuff worked from the beginning. You were in tune with natural health and all this stuff. Like, what could we have done?
Okay, so I'll say this as somebody who studied a lot of animal behaviorism and sociology. There has never been a time in history until now where we protected our elderly at the expense of our young. That's just not how any mammalian population functions. We do not sacrifice our young for the sake of the elderly and sickly, right? Viruses cull herds. I hate to say it that way, but I live out in the country. If you ask any rancher or anyone who's ever done any animal husbandry, they know that viruses cull herds. Anybody who knows their stock, their animal stock or their livestock knows which of their animals, when a virus comes through, they know which ones of their animals are going to die first, right? And so what we had situationally in the world was the prior flu season was pretty mild. And so we had a lot of elderly who would have probably left the planet the year before had the flu been more severe, but they didn't. And unfortunately, the term for that is dry kindling. We had a lot of dry kindling. And then I will add the term wet kindling, which would be your younger person who, probably someone my age, the middle-aged person who's severely metabolically dysfunctional. That's like wet kindling. So we had a lot of kindling, and the virus did its thing on the kindling. And that sounds, I do not mean any disrespect by that. And I don't mean to negate anyone who's lost a loved one. I understand that all life is valuable. However, we really did sacrifice our young, and we're using our young at this point as shields to protect the elderly, which is very weird because since the vaccine doesn't stop transmission, I have no idea why we're vaccinating children who have absolutely no risk of dying of this virus. The numbers of deaths in the US alone on children is staggeringly small. And since the pandemic started, I mean, it's staggeringly small. And that's with flawed reporting of with COVID or of COVID. We don't even know. And it's only looking at the group of 0 to 17-year-olds. So that's a big difference. Like little kids really have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than they do of dying of COVID. So anyway, I digress. But yeah, I would have protected the elderly in a more, well, let's put it this way. Elderly folks are nutritionally malnourished for the most part. As they age, they lose the ability to digest their food because of just atrophy in the digestive tract. They start to have dentition problems, so they stop eating protein. It's more difficult for them to turn that protein into muscle. Their muscles start having inflammation-induced sarcopenia or muscle wasting. And so we've got a frail population. We should have boned them up.
Also, the elderly population has been the most propagandized to eat just oatmeal and mush and not like no protein anyway. I just want to throw that in. Every old person I know is obsessed. All they think health is eating fiber. That's all they think health is avoiding meat and eating fiber.
Which just does terrible things to their gut in so many cases. For those of us who don't deal with fiber well, like I couldn't think of I joke with my husband that if the zombie apocalypse comes, I am totally screwed if we have to live off beans and grains, because I'll die of that before I die of getting caught by a zombie. Yeah. So we have a frail adult population, geriatric population. They should have been protected and fed well and taken really good care of. But instead we isolated them and put most of them into some sort of, further pre-diabetic or diabetic state and dementia. It's atrocious what we did to our elders during this. I think that is like stage 1 crimes against humanity, and it's up there with what we've done to young people. I would have let the virus go through the population in a more controlled fashion. I don't say let her rip, but what we did, like especially Oregon, they locked us down so hard and then they'd open and then they'd lock down and then they'd open. And what that was a really poorly done let her rip. That's what we did throughout most of the country, was a very poorly done let her rip strategy, which I think cost far more deaths because every time they locked us down, our immune systems got inhibited, our microbiome diversity decreased, and then and we lost the ability to kind of gain that natural immunity through the course of allowing some people to roam around. And then boom, they open everything up, cases drive up, they lock us down again. I mean, it was so poorly done from a actual scientific standpoint. And the doctors that wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, they really outlined a good plan in that I think would have been far more beneficial in the end. And if we count the deaths from increases in diabetes, increases in heart disease, increases in cancer, and then definitely increases in suicides, alcoholism, the stats on alcoholism are insane, what we've done to our society. So yeah, it's pretty atrocious in my opinion. This was done very, very badly. And I don't think humans will soon forget, I hope they don't, what was done to them by poorly managed public health decisions based on mathematical metrics in the first place,
Well, it's a big lesson, and you can't control a virus, really. You can't control nature. I mean, you can try to control it like temporarily, but it doesn't work. And I was posting about this from the very beginning. I remember I went back in my old posts like 2 years ago, and I was, before anyone talked about any jab or anything, and I was just saying, you can't control it. Like viruses go through, and it's like we have, like you said, almost 90% of the population is unhealthy. That's a determining factor. Any mitigation strategies of lockdowns or shots or this or that, they're not going to do much if you have the 90% population being metabolically damaged. That's the part we need to focus on. That's what you can control. What you can't control is how it works, because the virus has to go through the population no matter what. That's just how viruses work. We always knew this. That's why they even said, oh, to flatten the curve. No one ever said that the total area under the curve was going to be smaller. It's the same
Yes,
area under the curve. It's just
exactly.
flattened. No one talked about that. I was the only one shouting about this, maybe because I'm an engineer and I know what AUC is. I don't think the average citizen knows about area under curve, but it's like that's the same number of people would die. It's just extending that.
Yep, that's exactly. I was saying the same thing. I was like, guys, the same amount of people, if not more, are going to die from this. And if we do this strategy, I completely agree with you. I understand the area under the curve. And I was like, this was never about stop. It went from flattening the curve to zero COVID. And that you can't do that. It was already out. Like you said, the virus was out. Viruses are going to virus. So it was already out. And I was like, we can't go from, first of all, you can't do a lockdown policy in a democratic society. And the virus was already out and circulating. So that's it. It's out. It's going to go. It's going to go from host to host to host. Its whole agenda is just to make it around, right? It doesn't want to die off. It doesn't want to burn out its host population. It like Ebola doesn't get far because Ebola like melts the humans that it infects quickly, and it doesn't go far because of that. Those people are not ending up on planes. They're not spreading it, but COVID was out, or SARS-CoV-2 was out. And so I was just sitting there watching you, same as you. I mean, I was watching your posts and I'm like, yes, everything you were saying was similar version to what I was trying to say. And I was like, is somebody going to realize that this is accurate? And here we are, right? It's out. And finally, Fauci basically said, make your preventative medicine plans, like decide what your health risk, decide your risk, take your risk tolerance into account. And the thing that got me was it went from all of that to arguing about ivermectin. And I was like, if you put, and this is not a derogatory term, but it's the old adage, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. If you throw ivermectin at a metabolically unsound person, they're still going to be metabolically unsound. It's not the lifesaver that everybody
Yeah.
says it is. I know it has had some profound impacts on many people. I didn't find it to be terribly helpful myself. I actually did much better with hydroxychloroquine. Hey, everyone's a different individual, but neither of those were what saved me. My good metabolic health saved me. My muscle saved me. My overall good nutritional status saved me because I trained for this. The minute I knew the virus was here, I was like, I am really going to double down on getting my shit together. I was already living a very healthy lifestyle, but I was like, now we're really going to take it seriously. And that part also needs to be taken into account with the vaccines. We have the data, and this was something I was saying from the beginning. I was like, you guys, the same folks who are most at risk for dying of this virus, the frail, the elderly, the sickly, the malnourished, the obese, not only do those people actually spread more virus, they are the ones who are the super spreaders. We have had that data for years. That is who is actually most infectious to the rest of us. Not only that, they carry the virus for longer and they spread more of it because they have higher viral titers or viral loads, if you will. But they don't seroconvert with vaccines very well. So like we're vaccinating a group that isn't even going to respond to the vaccine that well. And we're hoping that's the answer and solution out. And I'm like, seriously, can it get any crazier? I was just watching this unfold, like trying not to go insane through it because I'm like, you guys are literally counting on one thing that isn't going to work in the group that needs it the most. And you're going to assume that that's going to get us all out of this. Like, did nobody pay attention in basic sciences year one of medical school? Because or high school or undergrad, it's lunacy. And I think that just kept getting passed over for hope, maybe some kind of safetyism, hope, weird collectivism that I just couldn't get behind it.
It was very interesting, yeah, that there was this worldwide coordinated effort after one solution. And anything that wasn't for that one solution was banned and censored. And it's just very interesting moment in history that we can dissect. And I've done some podcasts where we've gone a little deeper on it, but maybe not this one. Dr. Zoe Harcombe, there's a lot going on in the world and how it's run, which is interesting. But it's just so strange that was the one thing, that was the one solution, and it wasn't maybe the best one when there's so many other things you could have done. And what I want to go back to the people who are more obese, people who carry around extra fat, adipose tissue, even visceral fat too. You don't have to be necessarily obese to have a visceral fat problem and have a lot of inflamed tissue that will make you spread the virus more, all that stuff. So you did mention it, but I just want to emphasize that. And if you could say that one more time and just kind of go into that, like, people are saying, hey, this is fat shaming. And we're like, no, this is science. You guys are talking
This is
about
facts.
following the science. Let's follow the science on obesity and spreading COVID more.
Yeah. Well, I think that this truly is a pandemic of the metabolically unsound more than it is about a virus. It was just a shining a giant spotlight on how sick we've become as a species. I think 100 years ago, COVID wouldn't have been a big deal, to be honest with you. I think it would have just ripped through, killed some, and it would have been over like every other virus. People
Can
don't
I
realize
jump
the
in real
common.
quick?
Yeah.
Because I think Africa is a window into 100 years ago. And I went to Africa last February during the middle of it. They didn't do anything and nothing happened. And they looked like us 100 years ago. They were all thin, like they're pretty active. They're pretty fit. They only have access to mainly whole foods. I mean, yes, they eat some, like a lot of maize flour and stuff, but still they were doing fine. Nothing happened. But I want to keep,
I
you know what I mean?
agree.
They just didn't do anything. They're all good. That's kind of like what 100 years ago looked like.
Right. And a lot of people said, well, it's because they had access to ivermectin. I disagree. I think it's because they're metabolically sound. They're not sitting in the situation metabolically that we are in the United States. That video I made that went viral, that first video I made way back when the pandemic started, I said, this virus hasn't seen North America yet. And I meant it. I didn't mean North America hasn't seen the virus. I meant this virus hasn't even gotten to like the most diabetic place in the world. And we have exported our diabesity all over the planet, right? This is an American phenomenon that we have exported through our shitty food supply and our terrible allopathic ways of doing medicine. But yeah, so visceral fat's the fat that lies under the belly. It's not your subcutaneous fat. It is very, very prevalent. I've been trying to get people to understand that, like, probably the simplest way to assess your risk for diabetes or prediabetes is to take your waist circumference. If it's over 35 inches in a woman or over 40 inches in a man, and that measurement for women is like 2 finger widths above the belly button at the smallest part of the waist, you are literally walking into a diabetes diagnosis at some point in your future. And I've seen it on thousands and thousands of labs. I have seen the same thing. I have rarely seen a metabolically sound patient walk in my door who wasn't like actively lifting weights and eating really well. So now if you couple that with some high blood pressure, which a lot of Americans have, I can almost guarantee you've got metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. And walking around with metabolic syndrome and prediabetes, same thing, just it's an interchangeable word. You're basically dealing with all the same crap you would as a diabetic. Diabetes is just a magic number you hit eventually. Eventually, your blood sugar gets up to 120 on your fasting glucose labs, and your doctor goes, oh, you have diabetes. It's like, welcome to the club. You've been rocking this for probably a decade or more. The changes to your vascular system, the changes to your inflammatory output, it's all been there going on, burning for the past 10 years. And so this is where
And
most
no
Americans
one's told them. Really, no one's told them. Our system's so
no.
bad at warning them. But yes, keep going.
I try to warn them and I get called dangerous and attacked. And then people are like, you need to differentiate type 1 from type 2 and blah, on and fucking on and on and on. Everybody wants to get in the weeds. And I'm like, you guys, if you are not lifting weights and eating adequate protein and sleeping well and getting sun, you're probably not in the 12% of us that are metabolically sound. You're probably in the group walking into diabetes. It's that simple. 88% of people listening to this, well, maybe not your podcast because you have a different group of health seekers, but 88% of the general population of any room of adults is either diabetic or pre-diabetic at this point in our country. That's where we're at. And so that's shockingly frightening. And I knew the existential dread came over me when this started because they weren't talking about it. And I was like, oh, I looked at my husband. I'm like, we are so screwed. This is going to go on and on and on and on because our population is way too sick to handle it. It's not my fault. I tried. I spent 10 years in the trenches trying to get people to change their ways in practice. And people didn't want to hear it. For the most part, people didn't want to hear it. And you know from behavioral psychology that people don't change their minds unless they want to. You could give them all the data in the world. And so we knew that the metabolically unsound, we had data coming out of China early on that was the group getting hit hardest by this. We knew who was most at risk. And the fact of the matter is when you've got visceral fat, you are walking around with like a cytokine factory. It's literally a cytokine factory living underneath your muscle layer, creating massive destruction and inflammation throughout your body. And that's the wet kindling. You're just sitting there waiting to go up in flames. It puts you at risk for everything, including cancer. You're pretty much guaranteed a slow, miserable descent into chronic illness as you age, pain, surgeries, cardiovascular disease. It's the root, everyone talks about root cause medicine. And I'm like, the root cause of most root causes is actually metabolic dysfunction at its core. And we can talk about all the other things that people have that they want to hang their diagnosis, put their diagnosis hat on and wear it with pride. But I'm like, at the end of the day, it's lack of muscle mass, it's lack of sufficient protein, it's metabolic dysfunction. And that's the root problem, I think, of what's keeping this virus going and keeping driving this whole thing. And if we could get to the bottom of that, this might actually turn the corner. I don't think the government wants it to end, right? They've got an agenda, but that's it. So fat cells have more ACE2 receptors, which the virus binds to. And we knew from influenza studies that the obese population and diabetic population and malnourished folks, people with nutritional deficiencies actually drive viral, that they're super spreaders too. So we've got a whole bunch of malnourished, overfed, undernourished human beings walking around, rocking a lot of visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Eventually, if they're young, we are seeing adult diseases in young children, which we shouldn't be seeing, heart disease and diabetes type 2 in kids, but we are. But those fat cells will become inflammatory eventually. So if their homeostasis is holding as a younger person and they're like, I'm fine, my doctor said I'm fine. I'm like, well, first of all, most doctors don't evaluate you correctly and thoroughly for metabolic health. But beyond that, as an adult, that will turn into an inflammatory situation. We're going to end up with hormonal disruption in there. The whole thing is just a mess. And then they're sitting in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s getting more and more and more malnourished because they're depending more on, like you said, gruel instead of protein. And something comes along that takes advantage of that, evolutionarily, whether it came out of a lab. I think it did come out of a lab looking at it, but it definitely doubled down on those who had the propensity towards inflammation. And the root cause of that inflammation is metabolic health, I believe.
And yes, and the visceral
was that
fat
your answer?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And the visceral fat is just like that number one sign of metabolic dysregulation. It's like it's your body basically like, I have this extra energy, I have this extra stuff that I don't know where to put, and I'm going to put it around the organs. And I mean, yeah, I think some model of it is that it's protecting the organs in a sense. So it's like at least the organs aren't getting this. It's like this protection layer, but it's basically this storage of very inflammatory tissue that will get you. And I've done a lot of podcasts on this. People know Dr. Sean O'Mara. He does MRI scans, and so you can actually see it. You've seen those?
Yeah, I love him. I love his work. I'm like a secret super fan if he's listening.
It's awesome.
I lurk. I go for sprints every day and I think of him. I just run around my farm.
Great. I love it. Doing the sprints, and you're talking about lifting weights. There's so many things we can dive into now, but let's go with muscle. Let's go with muscle. Yeah. Tell us more. I'm so glad that you keep mentioning keeping up with your muscle mass and protein.
Yeah, well, so I'm not a very girthy gal. Like I'm not super buff. I'm kind of a skinny chick, and I've always been a skinny chick, and I don't have a lot of curves, but I do my best. I build the parts I need to try to give myself the look of a waist, but I'm a skinny chick, and I tend to waste. So when I get stressed, I waste. Also, this virus is a wasting disease. That's what people don't realize. People are walking in with a lot of severe lack of muscle to begin with, and then, which is your metabolic health driver. I believe that all metabolic dysfunction starts in the muscle, and then they are wasting. They're having tremendous wasting occur during the virus process, which really puts you at risk for death. Like if you lose 10% of your weight during any illness process, you are in deep shit. And ICU nurse told me the other day, I talked to a lot of ICU nurses. I've been getting like frontline from all over the world, what's going on in the ICUs. So everything I'm telling you is literally what's been happening in the ICUs throughout the entire pandemic. This is who they've been seeing. But when you enter the ICU, it's almost a known factor that you're going to lose 4% of your body weight just by entering the ICU in that process. So you don't want to go in without that insurance of muscle mass. That's your suit of armor. And so I lift 3 times a week. I try to get my protein in. I have a hard time with it. I've never been I have a hard time packing in enough protein into my stomach just doesn't want it, but I work on it. And I lift weights and I stay active. Sure, it's vanity, but most of it's because I don't like living with chronic pain, which I've suffered with for a long, long time. And if I don't stay moving, I hurt. And if I hurt, the whole world gets bad for me. So I stay mobile and I stay strong so that my spine doesn't, wreck my life all the time. And I think that I understand, I've been in the places where you're in so much pain that you can't move. And it very quickly snowballs into that fluffy layer around the waist. My visceral fat starts to increase. I start to get puffy. My hormones start to fall apart. It happens so quickly. You're like, how did I get here? And so for me, it's a matter of staying on top of it, like hardcore. Like it's the agenda every day is to keep Tina out of pain. Like that is what I wake up with and that is how I function. And so it's very motivating for me. People who don't have pain, who have other things creeping up, so many patients would have metabolic dysfunction and they had no other symptoms. They would have some high blood pressure, but nothing they felt. There was like no lightning rod that would alert them that something was wrong. For me, it's my back pain. My spine lights up and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm doing something wrong. I got to right the ship. But I think for people who don't have any sort of outwardly direct symptoms that they can put their finger on, it's a lot more insidious and it slowly creeps up on them. And I'll tell you what I told my patients, if your waist circumference is above those numbers I mentioned, and you're not actively building muscle as like a job, like you're not like us where we specifically train, I'm sure you train several times a week as well, you probably are going to walk into metabolic dysfunction because it's a natural part of aging. We become more carbohydrate intolerant as we get older. So it's just going to happen, right? Especially if you're eating the standard American diet and really not paying a lot of attention to what you're putting in your mouth, which is most Americans. And so it's only going to get worse. So when they say, well, I don't feel bad now, and they're 40, 45, I'm like, oh, you will. This is not going to go well for you. I think COVID just speeds that up, right? But the process is still there. And so the first thing I tell them is lift weights before they even touch their diet or their sleep or their mindset or any of the other things. I'm like, start with strength training. Because if you start with strength training, you inherently do all the other things better. You start to hydrate. You want to go to bed on time. You actually get hungry for protein. You stop craving garbage. You work so hard on that muscle that you really want to feed it well. So you do tend to radiate, hopefully, if your instincts are correct and on, then you start to move more towards protein. And so all the things fall into place. And I think lifting is very meditative. So it gives you some mindset. Plus, when you do hard things in the gym, it translates into your life and you're like, I can handle this. I'm not afraid and I can do hard things mentally because physically I just, worked it out in the gym. So I think that it translates into a lot of benefits that we don't even think about, including better sex, better relationships with our loved ones, being able to play with our kids or our grandkids, being able to get up and down off the floor readily. I mean, these are the things that my patients would say to me. These are the things that matter to me. It's not about aesthetics. It's about surviving the zombie apocalypse, and it's about having mobility, and it's about being able to do the things we love with the people we love. Like I had one guy come to me and his whole agenda was to lose his belly fat. He had a big old belly and he had bad knees. I had to inject his knees with stem cells and PRP, and we worked on his visceral fat because his hot little 75-year-old wife who did Pilates her whole life wanted to go hike the Great Wall of China, and he couldn't keep up with her. And he was like, I'm going to hike the damn Great Wall of China with my hot wife, or she's going to go by herself. So those are the things that matter, right? Like we're talking about all this in terms of surviving COVID, or people look at someone who's younger and say, oh, well, it's about vanity. It's not about vanity. It's about living a vital life till the end and not breaking a hip, because breaking a hip is the kiss of death. And that is, you end up alone in a hospital with pneumonia and you die. That is, or you have a significantly higher risk of dying over the next 10 years if you break a hip. So my goals are very simple. I want happy hormones. I want mobility. I want, of course, my pain to go down or away. And I want to not break a hip when I get old. And I want to be running circles around the young ones when I'm in my 80s. And I want to still be able to train in my 80s and not be hung up. So that's what it's about. Like that at the bottom is the bottom line of why I tell people to lift weights.
That's a tough pill to swallow for some. I think a lot of people push back on lifting weights and they don't want to do it, even in the health community, because I do talk about nutrition mostly, but I do really agree with you on that how important the muscle is, and that lifting weights, doing some strength training or doing some exercise can actually maybe be a good first intervention because it gets people motivated. I think that actually is really interesting. I've not talked about it much, but I've noticed it a lot. Yeah, if you start working out, then you don't want to screw around as much
Yeah,
because you're like, I just did a hard workout. I'm not going to go eat trash. I'm going to go eat
right.
my steak, get my protein. Yeah, I'm going to go to sleep on time. I'm going to do all
Go to
these things.
bed.
It is. No, but
Yep.
it's so huge. But muscle, like people, they even have propaganda against people who are fit and carry muscle now. They're saying it's like this far right, whatever. Did you see those news
Oh yeah,
articles?
we're white supremacists all of a sudden.
White supremacy, they're trying to attack
Very
it. It's like,
weird.
but I'm telling you, even people in the health world, they don't want to build muscle. They have all these excuses. Some women say, "Oh, I don't want to get bulky," or they're like, "Oh, well, that's not for me," or "Well, I just do my diet right." And it's actually super super important to carry some muscle, and it should be a necessity. I think there's like this baseline of human needs and that we're not meeting, and like some sort of this movement part or this strength training part is part of that. It's like a baseline of being human. Like it's just
Yeah.
what our body expects.
I think it's a non-negotiable. That's what I tell people. I'm like, start with the strength training. Yeah, yoga's nice. Pilates is amazing. I love my reformer. I'm a big Pilates devotee, but start with strength. Start with strength, everything else. And then running, things like everyone wants to go do cardio first. Cardio is earned, in my opinion, because as someone who fixed people's joints for a living for a long time, I can tell you that taking a very deconditioned human with very little muscle mass, a lot of adipose tissue, which is putting a lot of weight on those joints, and sending them out for runs every night because they've decided they're going to strap on their shoes and get healthy and fit, which I'm all
Hmm.
for. I want to high five them, but they end up destroying their knees and hips in the process, or their feet, because that's a lot of weight pounding down on very deconditioned joints that are wobbling all over the place. So I think that running is earned through strength. I think a lot of these things are earned through yoga. Same thing. You take these hypermobile, skinny little LA influencer girls, and they eventually end up in my office with shoulder dislocations and chronic shoulder and hip issues. So strength is the base. It's the non-negotiable base. Everything else is just like, frosting on the cupcake, if you will. And then because I get this too on Instagram. People say, I did everything you told me and it's not working. I've tried everything. I did all the things. I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. And these are usually middle-aged women. And I'm like, are you lifting weights? And they go, no, I haven't done that part yet. And I'm like, I told you to start there. Like, that's literally where I told you to start. If we focus on strength and we quit and we take the focus off of fat loss and weight loss, and that's the other thing, muscle burns fat. So if we all day long, not just when you're running on or riding on your Peloton. So if you prioritize strength, gain, muscle gain, everything else falls into place and everything else works better. If you do all the other things and you don't prioritize muscle and strength, your hormones will never balance out. I firmly believe that. None of the things will actually stick or work very long. And you'll be constantly chasing your tail in frustration when at the core, what you really need is muscle mass. Muscle does a lot of
Well,
good things.
but people don't want to do something hard. You said do something hard. It helps your whole day. It helps everything. People don't want to do the hard thing. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The modern society, it's like, how can we make it as easy as possible? And if you do that for long enough, you get so deconditioned. Your body's just so out of whack that it is way harder to climb back and just live like a normal human. But just I guess part of the problem is, well, you need to catch it before it starts. Really, that it wouldn't be so hard if we lived like normal humans. It wasn't hard for maybe even our grandparents because I think they just lived more like humans consistently throughout their whole life. So they never
Yeah.
had to, fight back against it at all.
I live on a farm with a farmer, and while we don't have any animals right now, we don't have any livestock. He gets up every day at 4 or 5, depending on what job. He's a blue collared electrician, and he never is in the gym, much to my dismay. He's never doing the deadlifts and squats. Like I always tell people, prioritize the big muscle groups. That's the fastest way out of metabolic dysfunction and diabetes, is to really build your butt. Build your ass and thighs and hamstrings, and you will turn that ship around very quickly, very, very quickly. And you'll burn up all the fat in your liver very fast. So he doesn't do that so much of that, but he works outside all day. He loves working outside. He picked this last job as an outside job. He's like, I want to work outside. I said, but it's May in Oregon. It's raining like every day. And sometimes
Mhm.
we get spectacular sunny days, which are amazing, but like it's still raining. And he's like, I want to be outside. I'm tired of being inside all winter. So this man's working outside in the rain. He's farm strong. He's got great muscle. It's just good integrity. Like my job was always to put my hands on my patients. So I know tissue integrity very well. And he's got great tissue integrity. He's strong as heck. He's just got that farm strong strength and great metabolic health in general, as long as he's eating well. Like we got to keep him off he likes the carbs. But once I got him off carbs and got him onto more of a carnivore diet, he just thrived, got him off testosterone, which most people say you can't get off of as you're edging up on 50. And we got rid of his high blood pressure completely, got him off of all of his blood pressure meds. And it was just through it's the same stuff we're talking about here, just basic stuff. And so he doesn't need the gym as much because he's out there doing the work every day, laboring, doing physical strength. And so, or physical exercise through his work. And so that's the thing, like he's working like a human should work. He's lifting heavy bags of
Yeah.
cement. He's digging holes with whatever needs to get done. He helps, even though he's an electrician. He loves to work physically. And so it's testament to what just being a hardy human really looks like versus all of us that are like cubicle and desk jockeys. And, you and I go in the gym to offset our sitting all day, but most people are working under fluorescent lights in a cubicle and they're wondering why they're so sick.
Yeah. Well, just thinking about, yeah, that's how humans were. We didn't have to use the gym before because we were naturally doing it all. And then, yes, even I don't work outside enough. Well, every once in a while I try to, build a fence or something. But we have to actually just go to the gym and do it. But
Yeah.
that's how people lived. And talk about carbs. Not all carbs are bad. I mean, these people could handle carbs back in the day because they were in their more whole form, and they were out there moving, and they're doing all these things that's kind of like don't rise the blood sugar, right? If
Right.
you're out there working and then you have a potato, you're going to be okay because it's a whole potato, and you just your body can mop up all that glucose into the glycogen in the muscles. And there's so many other things that people did that were controlling their blood sugar and not giving them insulin problems and not getting them diabetes when you just live like a human. Now everything, all the food is highly processed, highly refined, totally different. Sugar's added in everywhere. And now people do need to like figure out ways to just, avoid all of these things. Or, well, I think they should just learn ways to eat certain things in a healthy way, right? Or
Yeah,
live
for
like a
sure.
human more.
Yeah, just eat food that looks like where it came from in its whole form. If it's in a package and it's been highly refined, meaning I had someone ask me the other day, like, what does refined mean? And I was like, it came out of a factory after it had been powdered and reconstituted and then probably fried in some kind of seed oil, right? Like that is not what we should be putting in our bodies versus the potato. When you thinly slice that potato and you fry it in some kind of good oil, that's less bad. But even the thinly slicing, you just in essence refined it a bit. You made that starch easier to digest and more quickly to digest in the body. And so people are just living cluelessly, eating up a chemical laden shitstorm at most times, fried in disgusting seed oils, and getting very little animal protein. And I know the vegans get mad at me and the vegetarians get mad at me, but I just haven't seen vegetarians and vegans do great. I ran a lot of blood work. I ran blood work on almost everybody. And that was you could see it. I could tell just by looking at someone's labs how stressed out they were, how they ate, and were they predominantly vegetarian or vegan. It showed itself. And it showed itself in the joints as well. And that's a topic for a whole other day.
Oh
But
man, no, tell me more. No, I got to hear it because I know like they have low HDL. They have like kind of higher triglycerides, like low vitamin D. Like their skin looks like pale and gray. It's so weird. Like I can tell a vegetarian, and it's just they're not doing well.
no, the turgor of their tissue is very different. And their labs look like they're depleted oftentimes. Yeah. Sometimes their labs look like cancer patients' labs. They're so depleted. And they might be young. Again, the young folks listening, your homeostasis mechanisms will hold you over for a while until they don't. And who knows what that will be. For me, it was having a baby. That's when all the wheels fell off the car. Everything was fine. My crappy, aside from like getting hit with a cytomegalovirus, you would have thought that would wake me up. It didn't. I went from that over the next few years, just being miserable, assuming that was my fate, to having a baby. Not good. She has her own health issues because of it, because I was not in good shape to be having a baby. And on and on it went until I finally got my shit together. But eventually these things catch up. And so I'm going to be actually, Sean Baker's coming on my podcast, and he's an orthopedic surgeon by trade before he became the carnivore doc,
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about orthopedics and what that, because I think that osteoarthritis is really diabetes of the joint, and osteoporosis is diabetes of the bone. And the joints and the bones are BFFs with the muscle. So it's all contingent on what's happening with the muscle. So if your muscle is depleted and marbled with fat, and because of your metabolic health, and you've got sarcopenia because you're not building muscle and you're not feeding it well, you can bet you're going to end up with joint and bone issues. And this is where we see hip fractures and things down the line. So early on, it doesn't seem like a bad idea, but I'm the one taking care. I was the one when I was in practice taking care of those in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s who were dealing with the repercussions of what their earlier years looked like.
Well, see, yeah, you don't know it. You don't see it coming. It's a slow moving thing. You can't just feel it happening until you're like, wait, I can't go on a hike anymore because my joints hurt. Right? It's like,
Yep.
I wish people could see it more to know, because they do need that wake up call, or they're just going to let it happen.
You would have thought that COVID would have been the wake up call. That's what I keep coming back to. Like the real risk of death for a time, not anymore, but for a time, you thought that would have woken people up. But I'm hoping that.
Well, it's the wrong messaging. Like Bill Maher did a lot of content on, he's like, we just did the wrong messaging the whole time. We could have told people and woke them up. Maybe it would have worked. It's weird how humans work. They just never do the wake up call. It never works. Even with your virus problem back in the day, you still kind of went back to the old ways. It's like, I don't know how to solve that problem, right? We're just doing content trying to help people, but it's like, how do you get people to wake up? Maybe that's your last thought here before we go.
I think it comes through education and through walking the talk. I really think it comes down to walking the talk and modeling by example. And so, you have a different demographic than I do. I'm a woman edging up to 50 years old, and I still look healthy, and I still have good muscle mass. And yeah, I've got some health issues myself, and I've got some sun damage on my skin, but most women my age don't look like me. And that's because I actively work at it. And so all I can hope to do is to continue to be on awesome podcasts like this, present the information. Maybe hearing it from me will click. Maybe hearing it from you will click, right? It's like that Dr. Oz phenomenon when patients would come into my clinic and I tell them the same thing for 4 years. And then they'd be like, you never guess what I heard on Dr. Oz today. Did you know? And I'm like, so I called it the Dr. Oz phenomenon. Finally, it clicked, right? So people need about 7 touch points before something becomes a consideration. So hopefully through listening to podcasts like this and the work that you and I are doing, and you inspire me to keep posting the truth, and I hope to inspire others to do the same. And all we can do is, because there are some people who are going to resign themselves to letting their toes get cut off because of diabetes, and that's their prerogative. They'd rather do that than give up carbohydrates and exercise. So all we can do is educate and lead, I think that's the best. Well, people will not change their minds until they're ready to change it.
Well, yeah. And also letting them know that it's a choice. I heard you say it once that it's maybe controversial to say, but that living with chronic illness is 95% of the time a choice. Maybe you can talk about that for the last minute here.
Sure. I know we got to run. People identify by their diagnosis often because that's all they know. And it's a family dynamic I've seen in clinical practice. There's often an enabler in the family who actually kind of preferentially likes to keep that person in a weakened state. And then that person who is in the weakened state living with the chronic disease only knows how to identify through that chronic disease. It's finally a relief that they have an answer, but they put a label on it. And through that label, and then they collect more labels and more medications to go with those labels, i.e. diagnoses. And that is how they identify. That's how they get attention. That's how they use that as a way to say no to things when they don't want to do something, or when they don't want to step up to the plate and take responsibility. Oh, I can't because of my fill in the blank. And so that's where we're at as a society, is a bunch of people using their diagnoses as their excuse. I used to do it myself. I completely empathize. However, I don't like to diagnose my patients. I tell them, your shoulder's jacked, go get strong. Go work with a personal trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, get your shoulders strong, get the rest of your body strong, then come back and we'll treat it. And 9 times out of 10, they don't need to get treated once they get strong. And like I said, all the other things fall into place. And so it's really the onus of responsibility is on the individual, whether or not they want to survive the zombie apocalypse. That's it at the end of the day. And collecting diagnoses is just another way of adding excuses to the pile. I firmly believe that.
So victim mentality is pushed these days. It seems like that's like what the mainstream wants people to think. And it's very counterproductive. It's like, that's how I can tell like our crowd is different. It's like everyone I meet, they're like, no, I don't have a victim mentality. I take care of myself. And this is why I get along with these people. This is why what I'm doing here in Austin. Everyone's like, no. I'm going to solve this myself. I take care of myself. I'm not a victim. I love it.
I love it. That's it. That's the message, right? And all we can do is model that and hope that it instills some bravery in others to step up. And then we provide them the information they need to do better. And when they know better, they do better. And that's always the messaging. That's what I'm trying to get out on social media, on Instagram, on my podcast, is just giving them the information they need to make better decisions in the hopes that they'll step up and do better. Because we all need it right now so we can get out of this mess.
Please do. Please take some steps on your own. Dr. Tyna, thank you so much. TYNA. Where do people find you?
Yeah, thanks. So it's DRTYNA, Dr. Tyna on Instagram, or drtyna.com. I've got a free book there. You can find my podcast there, and all my offerings are on my website. And my podcast is called The Dr. Tyna Show. And I would love to have you on sometime so we can further this conversation.
Let's do it. We could go on forever, but we got to go. Thanks so much. People find her online, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Brian.